Okay, so when we talk about English spreading around the globe, what comes to mind? Probably ships sailing off to America or Australia, right? But you know what? That's really only half the story. The second wave of English expansion, well, it was a completely different beast, and it left behind a legacy that we're still living with right now.
So you've basically got these two huge, distinct waves of English spreading. That first wave, it created what we call mother tongue countries. You know, places like the US or Canada, where English is the main, number one language, the L1. But the second wave, and this is what we're digging into, it did something totally different. It didn't replace local languages. Instead, it created second language societies, where English, or L2, became the super important language for things like government and school, living right alongside all the native languages.
All right, so just to be clear on that first diaspora, that's the one we all kind of know. We're talking about huge numbers of English, Scottish, and Irish speakers moving, starting way back in the 17th century, to places like North America and Australia. Pretty simple, right? They took their language with them, and it just became the main language there.
But that second wave, that's where the story gets really interesting. It wasn't about people moving in mass. Nope, this one was driven by empire. We're talking about colonialism in Asia and Africa and how it completely rewrote the rules for how a language could spread. So this all really kicked off in the 18th and 19th centuries, right in the heart of colonial expansion across Asia and Africa. And the results? It wasn't a bunch of new countries where everyone spoke English as their first language. Not at all. What we got instead were these fascinating new Englishes, all these unique, local varieties of English used as a second language.
And to really get why the outcomes were so different, you have to understand the two types of colonies. The first diaspora happened in what are called settlement colonies. Think large-scale migration. But the second diaspora, that took place in exploitation colonies. Here, you had just a handful of British administrators running things for a massive local population. And that one difference, well, it changes everything.
So the big question is, how on earth does a language spread without tons of speakers actually moving there? Well, the answer is pretty clever, in a way. It was all about strategy. English was deliberately woven into the very fabric of the empire, using its most powerful tools, its institutions.
And you don't have to guess at the strategy. It's spelled out right here in this incredibly famous quote from Thomas Macaulay back in 1835. The goal wasn't to teach every single person English. No way. The goal was to create, and I'm quoting here, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes. Basically a local elite who could help them run the show.
And they had a clear three-step plan to make it happen. Step 1, make English the language of government and law. Step 2, set up schools that taught everything in English. And step 3, the real kicker. If you wanted a good job, especially in government, you had to know English. Simple as that. It created this massive incentive.
And the result of all this? It was huge, and it's lasted for centuries. English wasn't just another language anymore. It became the language of power, the language of the courts, and the ultimate key to getting ahead in life.
So this colonial policy left behind this really unique legacy. It created this whole group of countries that have a special and kind of complicated relationship with English. And of course, linguists have a name for it.
It's called the outer circle. This idea comes from a really influential model by a linguist named Braj Kachru. And the outer circle is basically all those former colonies. We're talking India, Nigeria, Singapore, where English isn't the main mother tongue, but it's still officially recognized and absolutely essential for things like law, government, and university.
And you can see how this works with models like this one. You've got this idea of a world standard English in the middle, but then it branches out into all these different regional and national types. West African English, South Asian English, you name it. It's such a great way to see that there's no single right way to speak English. There are tons of them, and they're all legitimate and always evolving.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about a few small places. This is a huge deal. We're talking about massive countries with enormous populations all over the world. India, Nigeria, Singapore, Kenya. The Philippines fits in here too, though its story is a little different because it was shaped by American colonialism, not British.
This is a really important point. The way people speak English in Nigeria or India, those aren't mistakes, not at all. They are distinct, rule-based versions of the language. Linguists have a great term for this. They call them norm developing. Why? Because they're developing their own norms and standards, not just copying the US or the UK.
Okay, but all of this leads to a really fascinating question, a real paradox, right?
If English was the language of the colonizers, the language of the empire, why on earth did so many of these countries keep it as an official language even after they became independent?
This pyramid here does a perfect job of showing what happened. In these countries that have tons of different languages, English just stayed at the top. It remained the language of power, of the government, of the educated elite, sitting way above all the local and regional languages.
And the reasons for keeping it were honestly pretty practical. For one, continuity. It was just way easier to keep the government and schools running the way they already were. Second, it acted as a neutral language. In a country with hundreds of local languages, picking just one would have been a political nightmare. English was seen as a way around that. And finally, there was global access. Everyone knew that English was the key to international trade and communication.
So that's where we are today, with this incredibly complex situation. A language that was first introduced as a tool of empire has been completely transformed. It's been adopted and adapted, and for millions of people, it's now the language of opportunity. So the question remains, English was a colonial tool. Why does it remain a language of power and opportunity today?